The sickening crack of her father's hand against her cheek was a sound Josephine Coleman would never forget. It wasn't just the sting, it was the finality of it. The sound of a door slamming shut on her life. She stumbled backward, her vision blurred by tears, the worn floorboards of the Texas ranch house groaning under her shifting weight. It was May 1879, and her world had just been sold for the price of a few dozen cattle. "You will marry Walter Blackburn," her father's voice boomed, each word a hammer blow. "By the end of the month. That is final." His face, weathered by the sun and worry, was a mask of grim resolve. He wasn't asking, he was telling her the terms of her surrender. "His money will save this ranch, and I'll not hear another word." Josephine's hand, trembling, rose to her burning cheek. "Father, please," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "He's 45 years old. He's buried 2 wives already." It was a known fact in Sweetwater. 2 young women withered away under his roof. "He's the wealthiest rancher in the county," her father countered, his boots echoing his agitation as he paced. "Our ranch is drowning. The drought has taken everything. The bank is at the door. Your brothers are gone. This is the only way, Josephine." Her mother stood by the kitchen doorway, a ghost in her own home. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, her hands twisting in her apron, a silent statue, a willing accomplice to the sacrifice of her own daughter. Josephine looked from her father's fury to her mother's silence and felt an icy dread creep into her heart. She wasn't just being married off. She was being fed to a wolf to keep the rest of the flock safe. "He looks at me like I'm property," Josephine choked out. "You're a woman in hard times." Her father's voice softened, but the steel remained. It was a fact, not an apology. "Walter will be here for dinner tomorrow to finalize things." The final nail in her coffin. Tomorrow. That night, the prairie sounds that usually soothed her were a symphony of menace. The coyotes' cries sounded like laughter. The moonlight stretching across her quilt felt like the bars of a cage. Marrying Walter Blackburn wasn't a life. It was a slow, agonizing death sentence. The tales whispered in town about his temper, his coldness, his demanding nature. They were enough to make her blood run cold. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a possession, a broodmare, a servant. As the first hint of dawn painted the horizon a fragile pink, a decision formed in the darkness of her room. Running was impossible. A lone woman on the prairie was a dead woman. But staying was a different kind of death. She had to do something, anything. With hands that shook so badly she could barely tie the knot, she packed a small canvas bag. A change of clothes, her mother's locket, a small book of poetry, a desperate, foolish plan to reach an aunt in Santa Fe began to take shape. It was a whisper of a hope, but it was all she had. The day was a blur of chores, each task performed under a cloud of impending doom. Every slam of a door, every shout from the yard made her jump. By late afternoon, she stood on the porch, a prisoner watching her executioner approach. A cloud of dust on the road. A carriage, flanked by 2 riders. Walter Blackburn, arriving early. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating against its cage. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't face him. Not yet. She turned and fled, not towards the open plains, but to the familiar scent of hay and horses in the barn. A few more moments of freedom. That's all she wanted. "Miss Coleman." The voice was deep, calm, and it cut through her panic like a knife. She spun around, her hand flying to her chest. A tall stranger stood just inside the barn door, his figure silhouetted against the blinding afternoon sun. He stepped forward, out of the glare, and the dying light caught his features. He was young, maybe 5 or 6 years older than her, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He held a wide-brimmed hat in his hands, a gesture of respect that felt alien after the brutality of her father. "Apologies for startling you," he said, his voice low. "My name is Adam Quincy. I'm a hand over at the Triple M Ranch, to the north." Josephine hastily wiped the tears from her face, trying to regain some composure. "What are you doing in our barn, Mr. Quincy?" His eyes flickered towards the cloud of dust that was now resolving into a carriage. His jaw tightened. "I saw Blackburn's party arriving. I know why he's here, Miss Coleman. The whole county knows." A hot flush of shame crept up her neck. "It's not your concern." "I worked for Blackburn for 6 months last year," Adam continued, ignoring her protest. His voice was urgent now, pressing. "I saw how he is. I saw what he did to the folks under his power. No woman deserves that fate." Outside, Walter Blackburn's booming laughter echoed as he greeted her father. Josephine flinched as if struck again. The sound was a physical blow. Time was running out. "Miss Coleman," Adam said, taking another step closer. He extended his hand, calloused and strong. "If you want to leave, I can help you. Right now." Josephine stared at his outstretched hand. Her mind was a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. This man was a complete stranger, a drifter, a ranch hand. Trusting him was madness. But the alternative was Walter Blackburn's cold eyes and heavy hands for the rest of her days. The alternative was the fate of the 2 wives who came before her. "Why?" she whispered, the question barely audible. "Why would you help me?" "Because I couldn't live with myself if I rode away knowing what's waiting for you in that house," he answered, his gaze unwavering. It was simple. It was direct. And somehow she believed him. The barn door creaked open. Her father's voice called her name. It was now or never. With a surge of adrenaline that drowned out all fear, she placed her hand in his. Adam didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he pulled her towards the back of the barn, to a chestnut stallion that stood waiting, saddled and ready. The voices were getting closer, footsteps crunching on the gravel just outside. He swung himself into the saddle and reached down for her. Josephine grasped his forearm, and he lifted her onto the horse behind him as if she weighed nothing at all. "Hold on tight," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her ear. The main barn door swung open just as they burst out from the rear entrance, exploding from the shadows into the golden light of the setting sun. Walter Blackburn's enraged shout was the last thing she heard clearly. Adam spurred the horse, and they thundered across the open pasture, the wind tearing at her hair, whipping tears from her eyes. She wasn't just running from a marriage, she was running for her life. Behind them, she could hear the chaos, men yelling, scrambling for their own horses. Her father's voice, raw with fury, carried on the wind, a curse chasing them across the plains. "They'll follow us!" she gasped, her face pressed against the rough fabric of Adam's shirt. "Not where we're going!" he yelled back over the sound of the pounding hooves. He veered the horse sharply, guiding it not towards the road, but down a steep embankment and into the shallow, muddy waters of a creek. The water splashed up, soaking her dress, but she didn't care. "This'll hide our trail for a while." They rode for hours, the setting sun giving way to a blanket of stars. They followed the winding creek until the land grew rough and broken, a wild country of canyons and mesas. Josephine's body ached from the ride, every muscle screaming in protest, but the fear was a relentless whip, driving her on. She clung to Adam, this stranger who had become her entire world. The rhythm of his breathing and the steady beat of the horse's gait, the only constants in a universe that had completely shattered. Finally, when they reached a dense thicket of mesquite and oak, a place so tangled it seemed impassable, Adam slowed the stallion to a walk. "There's a line shack up ahead," he said, his voice low in the quiet of the night. "Belongs to my employer at the Triple M. It's rarely used. We can rest there." The cabin was a dark smudge against the star-dusted sky, a one-room hovel that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. But to Josephine, it was a palace, a fortress. Adam helped her dismount, her legs trembling so much they nearly gave out. "I'll see to the horse," he said, his tone gentle. "Pumps round back if you need water." She nodded, speechless, watching as he led the animal away into the darkness. She was free, but she was also completely alone, with a man she knew nothing about, in the middle of nowhere. The thought should have terrified her, but all she felt was a strange, thrilling flicker of hope. Inside, the shack was sparse: a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. Adam came in a moment later, carrying his saddlebags and a bundle of firewood. "I'll sleep outside," he said, not looking at her as he knelt to build a small fire in the stove. "You'll be safe here, but we move at first light. Blackburn's not the kind of man to let this go." Josephine wrapped her arms around herself, the chill of the night seeping into her bones. "Where will we go?" "I know folks in Colorado Territory," he said, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. His expression was grim. "But it's a hard journey, and Blackburn will have men everywhere." He looked up at her then, his sea-gray eyes seeming to pierce right through her. "If you want to turn back—" "No," she said, the word coming out stronger than she felt. "I can't go back. I won't." A small, approving nod. "Get some rest, Miss Coleman. Tomorrow will be a long day." Sleep was a fickle thing. She lay on the cot, listening to the crackle of the fire and the lonely sounds of the prairie, her mind racing. Who was Adam Quincy? A simple ranch hand didn't risk his life for a stranger. There was more to him, she was sure of it. A strength, a competence that spoke of a life far more complicated than the one he described. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally claimed her. She awoke to the smell of coffee and the quiet sounds of Adam moving about the cabin. "We need to go," he said, his voice low. "Saw riders to the south. A long way off, but they're tracking us." They ate a hurried breakfast of jerky and hardtack and were back on the horse as the sun crested the horizon. The vast, empty landscape stretched before them, both beautiful and terrifying. "Why are you really doing this?" Josephine asked, her voice carried away by the wind as they rode. "You're risking everything for a stranger." Adam was silent for a long time. She thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice tight with an old pain, he spoke. "I had a younger sister, about your age. While I was away fighting in the war, my family fell on hard times. They married her off to a man like Blackburn." He paused, and she could feel the tension in his back. "By the time I got home, she was gone. Worked to death, the doctor said. I couldn't save her." He looked back over his shoulder, his eyes locking with hers. "When I saw you in that barn, I knew I couldn't let it happen again." An ache spread through Josephine's chest, a sorrow for the girl she'd never met, and for the man who carried her ghost. It was a noble reason, a heartbreaking reason. But as they rode on, a tiny, unsettling thought took root in her mind. His story was perfect, almost too perfect. It explained everything, neatly and completely. And in her experience, life was rarely so simple. For 3 days, they pushed north, winding through a maze of canyons and rocky outcrops. Adam was a master of the land, finding hidden springs and game trails, always choosing the path that would leave the faintest trace. He was more than a ranch hand. He was a survivor. On the 4th night, they made camp in a hidden alcove, the firelight dancing on the canyon walls. "Tell me about yourself," Josephine said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Before all this." He seemed surprised, but he obliged, telling her of a small horse farm in Virginia, of the war that had taken everything, of drifting west looking for a place to start over. It was a common story out here, but as he spoke, she watched his hands. They were strong, calloused from work, but they moved with a careful precision, and she noticed something else. Tucked into his saddlebag, she'd caught a glimpse of a book, not a dime novel, but a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets. Ranch hands didn't carry poetry. "And you, Miss Coleman?" he asked, turning the question back on her. "What were your dreams before Blackburn?" "I wanted to be a teacher," she admitted, a sad smile touching her lips. "It seems like a foolish dream now." "It's not foolish," he said, his voice earnest, "and it's not too late." Their eyes met across the fire, and in that moment a current passed between them, something warm and dangerous. The moment was shattered by the faint, distant sound of a man's shout echoing down the canyon. In an instant, Adam was on his feet, kicking dirt over the fire, plunging them into darkness. "They're close," he whispered, his voice a blade of ice. "Too close. We have to move. Now." They rode through the night, a desperate, frantic flight under the cold light of the moon. By dawn, they'd crossed into Indian territory, a lawless land where a man like Blackburn could do as he pleased. The horse was exhausted, and so were they, but Adam pushed them relentlessly onward. "There's a trading post a few miles from here," he said, his voice strained. "Run by a man named Joseph Standing Bear. He's no friend to men like Blackburn. We can get fresh horses, supplies." But they never made it. As they crested a low ridge, they saw them. 3 riders, fanned out across the valley below, directly in their path. Blackburn's men. Adam cursed under his breath, wheeling the horse around, back towards the cover of a rocky forest. But it was too late. 2 more riders appeared from the west, cutting off their retreat. "They've boxed us in," Josephine whispered, her heart turning to a block of ice in her chest. Adam's face was a grim, determined mask. "There's an old trapper's cabin nearby," he said, urging the horse into a gallop. "Against that hillside. If we can make it, we can hold them off." The cabin was a ruin, barely more than a pile of rotting logs, but its walls were thick. It was their only chance. Adam shoved her inside and then disappeared to hide the horse. He returned a moment later, pressing a small, heavy revolver into her hand. "Do you know how to use this?" She nodded numbly. Her father had taught her. "I don't want to kill anyone." "Neither do I," Adam said, checking his own Colt. "But they won't give us a choice." The wait was agonizing. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Then a voice called out, arrogant and cruel. "Quincy, we know you're in there. Send the girl out, and Blackburn might let you live." Adam peered through a crack in the logs. "Frank Miller," he murmured. "Blackburn's foreman. He's a snake." "What do we do?" Josephine asked, her voice a thin tremor. "We wait," Adam said. "They can't stay forever, but they could." As the sun beat down on the tiny cabin, Miller and his men made camp just out of rifle range. A siege. As dusk fell, the temperature dropped. They huddled together in the darkness, not daring to light a fire. The cold was a living thing seeping into their bones. "I'm sorry I got you into this," she whispered into the darkness. He shifted closer, his shoulder pressing against hers, a small point of warmth in the freezing dark. "You didn't. This was my choice." "Why, Adam? Why, really?" she pressed, needing to understand, needing the truth. He was silent for a long moment. "Because some things are worth fighting for," he said softly. Then, so low she almost didn't hear it. "And because the moment I saw you, I knew I couldn't let him have you." Her breath caught. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, her fingers lacing with his. They sat in silence, drawing strength from each other as the long, cold night deepened. Just before dawn, a new voice shattered the quiet. A voice she knew. Walter Blackburn. "Miss Coleman, Your father is a very disappointed man, but I am forgiving. Come on out now. We'll forget this foolishness and proceed with the wedding." Adam's hand tightened on hers. "He's lying," he whispered fiercely. "He'll kill me and drag you back." "I know," she whispered back, her fear solidifying into a cold, hard rage. "I'm not going." Blackburn's patience, it turned out, was thin. By midday, the shooting started. Not aimed shots, but sporadic cracks of rifle fire, chipping away at the logs of the cabin, chipping away at their nerves. They were trying to draw their fire, make them waste ammunition. The afternoon wore on, a slow, torturous crawl of time. And then Josephine saw it. A flicker of movement in the trees behind Blackburn's camp. Not an animal. It was a man, moving with stealthy, deliberate purpose. Then another. "Adam," she breathed, pointing. "Someone else is out there." Before he could react, the world exploded. Gunfire erupted, but it wasn't aimed at them. It was a volley of shots tearing through Blackburn's camp. Cries of shock and pain filled the air. Blackburn's men were being attacked from behind, caught completely by surprise. "Get down!" Adam yelled, pulling her to the floor as stray bullets whizzed through the cabin. The firefight was short, brutal, and decisive. When the sudden silence fell, it was more shocking than the noise. A new voice called out, calm and authoritative. "Adam Quincy, you in one piece in there?" A slow smile spread across Adam's face, a look of pure, unadulterated relief. "That," he said to Josephine, "is Thomas Marshall, my boss from the Triple M." They emerged from the cabin, blinking in the harsh sunlight. 4 men, tough-looking cowboys, stood over Blackburn's defeated party. Walter Blackburn himself was on his knees, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, a dark stain spreading across his shoulder. Thomas Marshall, a tall, gray-haired man with kind eyes, grinned at Adam. "Figured you might be in a spot of bother when you didn't show. Took us a while to pick up your trail." "Your timing," Adam said, shaking his hand, "is impeccable." Blackburn glared at Josephine, his eyes burning with hate. "This isn't over, girl," he snarled. "Your father signed a contract. You belong to me." Thomas Marshall stepped forward, his friendly demeanor vanishing. "Actually, Blackburn, it's over. I've got 4 witnesses here who saw you lay siege to this cabin. And I happen to know the territorial marshal would be very interested to hear about your creative cattle branding practices." Blackburn's face went pale. "You're going to tear up that contract," Marshall said, his voice cold as a crypt. "You're going to sell your ranch, and you're going to get out of Texas, or I will personally drag you to Fort Smith and watch you hang." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Blackburn, for the first time, looked truly defeated. "Fine," he spat. "The girl's more trouble than she's worth." Josephine watched as Marshall's men disarmed Blackburn's crew and sent them packing. The nightmare was over, or so she thought. "What will you do now?" Adam asked her gently. "I can't go home," she said, the reality of her situation sinking in. "Come with us to the Triple M," Marshall offered. "Our ranch hands have children. They need a teacher. The job comes with a cabin of your own." A teacher. Her dream. It felt too good to be true. "But I'm not qualified." "You can read and write, and you've got more grit than any 10 men I know," Marshall said with a smile. "You're more than qualified." As they rode towards the Triple M, a sprawling ranch that was more like a small town, Josephine felt a sense of peace settle over her for the first time in her life. She started her school in a small cabin, and the work was everything she'd hoped. Adam resumed his duties, but he always found a reason to be near, bringing her wildflowers or a new book. The bond forged in fire, and fear was slowly, beautifully, transforming into something else. One evening, months later, they sat on her porch as Adam read from his book of sonnets. She looked at him, at this man who had saved her, this strange mix of a rough cowboy and a gentle scholar, and she knew she was falling in love. But the questions still lingered. How had Thomas Marshall known where to find them? How did he know about Blackburn's illegal activities? It was too convenient. The pieces didn't fit. "Adam," she said softly, "the day you found me in the barn, you said you were just passing by." He closed the book but didn't look at her. "I was." "And Marshall? He just happened to get worried and find you in the middle of all that wilderness?" He was silent. The easy comfort between them evaporated, replaced by a sudden tension. "Josephine, tell me the truth," she insisted, her voice quiet but firm. "All of it." He finally turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made her heart stop. It wasn't love she saw there. It was pity. "I wasn't just passing by," he admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "And I don't work for the Triple M. I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency." The world tilted on its axis. Pinkertons, hired guns, union spies, men who operated in the shadows. "What?" she whispered, the word a puff of air. "Walter Blackburn wasn't just a rancher," Adam went on, the confession spilling out of him now. "He was involved in a land-grabbing scheme with a group of powerful men. They were forcing small ranchers into debt and then seizing their property. The Triple M is just one of the ranches they were targeting. My agency was hired by a collective of ranchers led by Thomas Marshall to get proof." "So you were just using me?" The accusation hung between them, sharp and poisonous. "Was any of it real? Your sister?" "My sister was real," he said, his voice raw. "That story was the truest thing I told you. But my mission was to get close to Blackburn's operation. When I learned he was forcing you into marriage, I saw an opportunity. I knew if I helped you escape, he would come after us, reckless and angry. He'd lead us right into a trap where Marshall and my team could catch him in the act of committing a violent crime, something we could make stick." Josephine felt a cold wave of nausea wash over her. She hadn't been rescued. She had been used. She was bait. A pawn in a game she didn't even know she was playing. The escape, the chase, the siege at the cabin. It had all been a setup, a carefully orchestrated performance to trap a bigger fish. "I'm sorry, Josephine," he said, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away. "My feelings for you, that wasn't part of the plan. That's real." "How can I believe anything you say?" she cried, backing away from him, the porch of her little schoolhouse suddenly feeling like the edge of a cliff. The man she'd trusted, the man she was falling in love with, was a liar. He had saved her from one monster only to reveal that he was another kind of deceiver. She had fled her father's house only to land in a cage built of lies. And the worst part? She had no idea who had hired him. If it wasn't Marshall, then who was the true puppet master pulling all the strings? She stared at him, at this complete stranger, and a new, more terrifying question began to form in her mind. Blackburn was a monster. Her father, a betrayer. But what if Adam Quincy, her supposed savior, was the most dangerous man of all? The silence stretched, filled only by the chirping of crickets. Adam stood on her porch, his face a canvas of regret, but Josephine saw only the calculation behind his eyes. Every moment they had shared, every whispered confidence, every shared danger, it was all tainted now, part of an elaborate deception. She wasn't a woman he'd saved. She was an asset he'd deployed. "Who hired you?" she asked again, her voice flat and cold. "If Marshall was just part of the cover, who is your real client? Who wanted Blackburn taken down so badly they'd use a girl's life as bait?" Adam hesitated, a flicker of conflict in his eyes. "I can't tell you that. It's not my place." "Not your place?" She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You made it your place when you walked into my barn. You forfeited the right to keep secrets from me then. Who is it?" Her mind raced. If not the ranchers, then who had more to gain? A rival? A politician? The answer, when it came, was so unexpected it knocked the breath from her lungs. "It was your mother." Josephine stared at him, uncomprehending. Her mother? The silent, downtrodden woman who couldn't even meet her gaze? The ghost in the kitchen? It was impossible. "You're lying," she whispered. "I'm not," Adam said, his voice soft. "Your mother stood by for years, watching your father sink deeper into debt and desperation. She watched him become a bitter, cruel man. But when he made the deal with Blackburn to marry you off, that was the one thing she wouldn't tolerate. She had a small inheritance her own father left her, money your father never knew about. She used every last cent of it to hire the Pinkertons. She hired us to save you." The image of her mother, hands twisted in her apron, eyes downcast, shattered. In its place was a woman of incredible strength and cunning. A woman playing a long, desperate game. She hadn't been silent out of weakness. She'd been silent to survive, to plot. "But why didn't she just tell me? Why this whole charade?" "Because she knew your father," Adam explained. "If you had just disappeared, he and Blackburn would have hunted you to the ends of the earth. The only way to ensure your safety was to remove them from the board entirely. She needed Blackburn not just avoided, but broken, his power dismantled so he could never be a threat to you again. She gave us one instruction: protect Josephine, no matter the cost." Every memory Josephine had of her mother replayed in her mind, now cast in a new light. The quiet glances, the way she'd leave a fresh biscuit by Josephine's bed after a fight with her father, the worn Bible with a single passage underlined. "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles." It hadn't been passive faith. It had been a promise. But this revelation brought a new, colder horror. Her father's deal with Blackburn. "My father, the ranch was really in that much trouble?" Adam's expression hardened. "No," he said flatly. "The drought was hard on everyone, but your father wasn't facing foreclosure. That was a lie. He wasn't selling you to save the ranch, Josephine." "Then why?" "He was selling you to get rich," Adam said, the words falling like stones. "About a year ago, your father found something on your land, on the far western pasture. An old, forgotten Spanish silver claim. It's worth a fortune. But he didn't have the men or the capital to excavate it. Blackburn did. The marriage wasn't about debt. It was the price of a partnership. He was selling his daughter to seal a business deal and cut you out of your own inheritance." The ultimate betrayal. It wasn't desperation that drove her father. It was greed. He hadn't been sacrificing his daughter to save his family. He was sacrificing her to enrich himself. He had looked her in the eye and lied, slapped her face and sold her future, all for the glint of silver buried in the dirt. The foundation of her entire life crumbled into dust. The man she thought she knew, the family she thought she had. It was all a lie. "Where is he now?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "After Blackburn was run out, your father's deal fell apart. Marshall's men made sure of it. He's still on the ranch, alone. A king of a dirt patch with a buried treasure he can't touch." A fierce, burning anger rose in her, hotter than any fear she had ever felt. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for him to be alone. He needed to face what he had done. "Take me back," she said. Adam looked at her, his expression shifting from pity to a deep, profound respect. "Are you sure?" "He has something that belongs to me," Josephine said, her eyes like chips of flint. "My name, my home, my inheritance. I'm not the scared girl who fled in the night anymore. You and my mother, you showed me what it means to fight. Now I'm going back to finish it." The ride back to the Coleman Ranch was different. She wasn't fleeing this time. She was a conqueror, returning to claim her territory. They rode in silence, Adam a willing soldier at her side, his deception forgiven if not forgotten, in the face of this new shared purpose. When they crested the final hill and saw the small ranch house nestled in the valley below, it looked smaller, shabbier than she remembered. Her father was on the porch, staring out at the land he had tried to buy with his daughter's soul. He looked older, broken. When he saw her, his face registered a flash of shock, then a flicker of hope, which quickly curdled into his familiar, stubborn anger when he saw Adam behind her. "Josephine! You finally came to your senses," he started, his voice a pathetic attempt at its old authority. "Get in the house. We can still fix this." "There's nothing to fix, Father," she said, dismounting and walking towards him, her steps steady and sure. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, forcing him to look down at her. "I know about the silver." The color drained from his face. He was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a line. "I know there was no debt," she continued, her voice rising with every word, a tidal wave of suppressed fury. "I know you tried to sell me, your own flesh and blood, for money. You stood by while that man laid claim to me. You struck me when I protested. You would have sent me to my death and counted your silver. I did it for this family," he finally roared, finding his voice. "For this land." "You did it for yourself," she shot back. "This land was meant to be my legacy, my home. You tried to turn it into my prison, but you failed." She took a step up, then another until she was standing right in front of him, eye to eye. He flinched, as if expecting a blow, but she wouldn't give him that satisfaction. "This ranch is mine now," she said, her voice dropping to a low, commanding whisper. "The silver is mine. You will sign the deed over to me and you will leave. You will walk away with nothing but the clothes on your back, and you will never, ever return." "You can't," he sputtered. "I can," she interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "Adam is a witness to what you and Blackburn planned. Thomas Marshall and half the county are witnesses. You can sign the deed or you can hang. It makes no difference to me." He stared at her, this daughter he had never truly seen, and in her eyes he saw not a girl, but a queen who had come to claim her throne, and he saw his own defeat. The fight went out of him, leaving behind a hollow, withered old man. Without another word, he turned, went inside the house, and returned with the deed. His hand shook as he signed his name, his life, his legacy away. He didn't look at her as he walked past, a broken man disappearing down the dusty road he had once ruled. Josephine stood on the porch of her house, her ranch, her future. The wind blew a strand of hair across her face, and she brushed it away. Adam came to stand beside her, his presence a quiet, solid comfort. "What now?" he asked. She looked out at the rolling Texas hills, the land that was now hers, bought and paid for with tears and terror and an unbreakable will. "Now," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face, "now I build a school." True to her word, Josephine didn't excavate the silver, not all of it. She used just enough to build the finest schoolhouse in the territory, right there on her land. A place of learning and hope for the children of the ranchers, a beacon of light in the rugged country. Her mother came to live with her, the two women healing the wounds of the past, forging a new bond built on truth and mutual respect. Adam Quincy, the Pinkerton detective, found that he no longer had a taste for the shadows. He resigned from the agency and took a job as Josephine's ranch foreman. They worked side by side, building a new life from the ashes of the old. Their love, born in deception and tempered in fire, was truer and stronger than any storybook romance. They married a year later, under the wide Texas sky, surrounded by the laughter of her students. She had faced down a monster, a greedy father, and a web of lies that would have broken anyone else. She had been used as bait, a pawn in a dangerous game. But in the end, she had flipped the board and become the queen. She had taken back her life, not by running from it, but by turning around and fighting for it, with a courage she never knew she possessed. Her story became a quiet legend in those parts, a tale of the schoolteacher who had faced down the devil and won. If you enjoyed this story of unimaginable betrayal and ultimate justice, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next dark tale we have in store.